The night sky exploded with light. Jake Morrison was cleaning his rifle on the cabin porch when it happened. A brilliant streak of white and blue tore across the darkness, brighter than any shooting star he had ever seen. The light painted the pine trees silver for just a moment. Then came the sound, a deep rumbling boom that shook the ground beneath his boots. Something had crashed in the mountains, something big. Jake stood frozen, watching the orange glow fade beyond the ridge about half a mile away. His dog, a German shepherd named Copper, whined nervously beside him. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just an eerie quiet that made Jake's skin crawl. He should call someone. The ranger station, maybe the sheriff. But his hand didn't reach for his satellite phone. Instead, he found himself staring at that distant ridge, his old military instincts kicking in. Whatever had just fallen from the sky, it was on his land, his responsibility. Probably just a meteor, he muttered to Copper. But the dog's ears stayed flat against his head. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat in his grandfather's old rocking chair, watching the window, his rifle across his lap. When dawn finally broke through the mountains, painting everything gold and pink, he made his decision. He packed his medical kit, some rope, water, and his hunting knife. Copper stayed close as they hiked up the ridge, moving through the familiar trails Jake had walked 1,000 times. But this morning felt different. The birds were back, but they sounded wrong, agitated. Even the squirrels seemed to be keeping their distance from something. The crash site wasn't hard to find. A long scar had been torn through the forest. Trees snapped like toothpicks. Earth churned up in a dark furrow. The smell hit him first, something like burning metal mixed with ozone. The way the air smells after lightning strikes close by. Then he saw it. The craft sat wedged in a ravine, partially buried in dirt and broken branches. It wasn't like anything Jake had seen before, not in his military days or in any museum. The hull was smooth and dark, reflecting the morning light in strange colors that seemed to shift when he moved. Parts of it were crumpled, and a thin wisp of smoke rose from a crack in the side. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. This wasn't a meteor. This wasn't anything from Earth. He approached carefully, every sense on alert. Copper growled low in his throat but stayed by Jake's side. The craft was about the size of a small truck, oval-shaped and seamless except for where the impact had damaged it. Heat still radiated from the metal. Through the crack, he could see inside, and that's when he saw her. She was slumped against what looked like a control panel, her body limp and clearly hurt. Jake's breath caught. She was humanoid, similar enough to make his brain accept what he was seeing, but different enough to leave no doubt. Her skin had a silvery tone, and even unconscious, there were faint patterns of light glowing beneath her skin, like veins filled with starlight. Her features were delicate, almost fragile-looking, with larger eyes than a human's and hair that seemed to shift between silver and white. Blood, blue and luminescent, dripped from a wound on her shoulder. Jake's medic training overrode his shock, injured, bleeding, needs help. The logical part of his brain screamed at him to walk away, to call the authorities, to let someone else handle this. But the part of him that had spent years saving lives, that had dragged wounded soldiers from danger, that part couldn't just leave her. "I'm going to regret this," he whispered. Getting her out wasn't easy. The craft's interior was cramped and filled with equipment he didn't understand. Some of it was sparking dangerously. Jake worked quickly, carefully supporting her head and neck as he pulled her through the opening. She was lighter than he expected, her bones feeling almost hollow like a bird's. He fashioned a stretcher from his jacket and some branches, securing her as gently as possible. The whole time his mind raced with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? Were others coming to look for her? But those questions could wait. Right now she needed medical attention. The hike back to the cabin took twice as long with the stretcher. Copper kept looking back at their passenger, confused but protective. Jake's arms burned by the time his cabin came into view, the familiar log walls a welcome sight. He set her up in the spare bedroom, the one that still had his grandfather's old bed and quilts. As carefully as he could, Jake examined her injuries. The shoulder wound was deep and there was a gash across her ribs. The blue blood worried him. He had no idea if human medicine would work on alien biology, but he had to try something. He cleaned the wounds with antiseptic, applied pressure to stop the bleeding, and used his best field dressing techniques. Her skin was cooler than human skin, and her pulse when he found it on her wrist was faster but weaker than it should be. The glowing patterns under her skin seemed dimmer now. "Come on," Jake said quietly, working by lamplight as afternoon faded to evening. "Don't die on me, not after I hauled you all the way down that mountain." He set up an IV drip with saline solution, hoping that at least hydration was universal. Then he sat back in the old wooden chair beside the bed, exhausted and covered in dirt and that strange blue blood. What had he done? He had an alien in his spare bedroom, an actual extraterrestrial being, and he hadn't told anyone. If she died, he'd have a body. If she lived, he'd have a situation he couldn't begin to understand. Jake looked at her peaceful face, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. She looked vulnerable, scared even in unconsciousness. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she was hurt and alone on a strange world. "You better be worth the trouble," he said softly. Outside, night fell over the mountains again. Copper lay down beside the bedroom door, standing guard. And Jake Morrison, former combat medic and current hermit, sat watching over his impossible patient, wondering what morning would bring. The glowing patterns under her skin flickered once, then steadied, just a little bit brighter than before. 2 days passed before she opened her eyes. Jake had barely slept, checking on her every few hours, changing bandages, monitoring her breathing. The blue blood had stopped flowing, which he took as a good sign. The wounds seemed to be closing faster than human injuries would, another relief. But she remained unconscious, her body recovering from whatever trauma the crash had caused. He was replacing her IV bag on the second evening when her eyes suddenly opened. They were large and dark, like pools of deep water, with flecks of silver that caught the lamplight. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Jake froze, his hand still on the IV line. Her eyes went wide with what could only be fear. Then she moved faster than Jake expected. She bolted upright in the bed, ignoring her injuries, and scrambled backward until she hit the wall. A sound came from her throat, words in a language that sounded like wind chimes and running water. Her hands came up defensively, and the patterns under her skin flared bright with alarm. Hey, it's okay," Jake said, raising his hand slowly, taking a step back. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe," but she didn't understand him. Of course she didn't. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the wooden walls, the simple furniture, the medical supplies scattered on the nightstand. When her gaze landed on the bandages covering her wounds, confusion crossed her face. She spoke again, urgent and questioning. Jake shook his head slowly. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "But you were hurt. Your ship crashed. I brought you here to help." She pressed herself harder against the wall, and Jake could see her trembling. This was terror. She was terrified of him. The realization hit him hard. To her, he was the alien. He was the unknown creature on a strange planet. Jake slowly sat down on the floor, making himself smaller, less threatening. He kept his hands visible and his movements gentle. "It's okay," he repeated, keeping his voice soft. "I know you're scared, but I'm not going to hurt you." They stayed like that for a long time. Jake sitting on the floor, her pressed against the wall, both watching each other. Slowly, her breathing calmed. The glow under her skin dimmed to its normal level. Her eyes never left him, but the pure panic began to fade into wary caution. Jake pointed to himself. "Jake," he said clearly. She tilted her head slightly, those large eyes studying him. He pointed again. "Jake, that's my name, Jake." Understanding flickered in her expression. She touched her own chest, and when she spoke, one word came out clearer than the others. "Lyra," Jake smiled slightly. "Lyra, that's beautiful." Over the next few hours, they established a fragile peace. Jake brought her water, showing her the glass first, drinking from it himself to prove it was safe. She accepted it hesitantly, sniffing it before taking a small sip. When nothing bad happened, she drank more eagerly. Food was harder. Jake tried bread, fruit, and soup, but she refused everything. Her nose wrinkled at the smell of the soup, and she pushed the bread away nervously. Jake didn't push it. Maybe their biology was too different. Maybe Earth food would make her sick. He needed to figure this out before she starved. That night, Jake set up a sleeping bag on the floor of her room. He could see the question in her eyes. "I'm staying here," he explained, knowing she didn't understand the words but hoping she'd understand the gesture. "So you feel safer. I'm not leaving you alone." The next morning, Jake started using pictures. He found an old notebook and began to draw. Simple stick figures, one stick figure helping another. A drawing of her ship, a drawing of the cabin. He showed her the sun rising and setting to explain days passing. Lyra watched with intense focus. Then she reached for the pencil. Her drawings were far more skilled than his. She drew her ship in detail, then drew it breaking apart. She drew herself inside, hurt. Then she drew Jake carrying her and pointed to him, then to the drawing. "Yes," Jake said, nodding. "I carried you here." She drew more. A symbol that looked like a medical cross pointing to her bandages. Jake nodded again. Understanding began to build between them. Over the following days, their communication improved. Lyra's injuries healed remarkably fast, and she grew strong enough to walk around the room. She was fascinated by everything: the wood-burning stove, the hand-sewn quilts, the simple oil lamp. She touched things carefully, studying them like they were priceless artifacts. Jake noticed she kept trying to tap her wrist, where a device sat broken and dark. She would tap it, wait, then make frustrated sounds. On the 5th day, she brought it to Jake, pointing to it and then to her ear. She mimed talking. "A translator?" Jake guessed. "That's how you'd understand me?" She nodded eagerly. Then her face fell as she showed him the cracked screen and dead lights. It was broken beyond use. They would have to learn the old way. Through patience and time, Jake started teaching her English words. He would point to objects and say their names: table, chair, window, water. Lyra picked them up quickly, her mind sharp and eager. She taught him words from her language too, though he struggled with the flowing sounds. One morning, Jake was making breakfast when Lyra came out of the bedroom. She had been staying in that room mostly, still uncertain about the rest of the cabin, but today she walked into the kitchen and watched him cook eggs over the wood stove. "Egg," he said, holding one up. "Egg," she repeated carefully. Then she pointed to the pan. "Hot?" Jake grinned. "Yes. Hot?" "Very good." She smiled for the first time, and it transformed her face. The fear that had lived in her eyes since she woke up finally began to fade. They ate breakfast together at the small wooden table. Lyra still wouldn't eat human food, but she sat with him, sipping water and watching everything he did. When Copper wandered over, tail wagging, she tensed. But the dog just sniffed her hand and licked it gently. Lyra laughed, a sound like bells, and carefully petted Copper's head. "Dog," Jake said. "His name is Copper." "Copper," she said softly, running her fingers through the dog's fur. "Good. Good dog." "The best dog," Jake confirmed. That afternoon, Lyra tried to explain her situation. She drew pictures of space, of a large ship orbiting a planet that had to be Earth. She drew herself in a smaller ship, alone. Then she drew the small ship breaking, falling, crashing. She drew an X through the ship and through a small device. "No signal," she said in halting English, pointing up at the sky. "No call, no home." Jake understood. Her people thought she was dead. She couldn't contact them. She was stranded. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Lyra looked at him with those deep eyes. Then she pointed to the cabin, to Jake, to Copper. She spoke carefully, choosing words she had learned. "You helped me, you good." "Thank you." Something warm spread through Jake's chest. He had made the right choice that morning on the mountain. Whatever complications this would bring, whatever danger, he had saved a life, and maybe, just maybe, he had found something he hadn't even known he was missing. A friend. Lyra touched his hand briefly, a gesture of trust, and Jake knew their journey together was just beginning. The first snow came 3 weeks after the crash. Jake woke to find the world covered in white, and Lyra standing at the window with wonder written across her face. She had learned enough English now to put simple sentences together, though she still struggled with complicated ideas. "Water from sky," she said, touching the cold glass. "But white, soft. Snow," Jake told her, coming to stand beside her. "Frozen water. It happens every winter here." "Winter," she repeated, trying out the word. "Cold time. Very cold. We need to prepare." Over the past weeks, Lyra had grown stronger and more comfortable in the cabin. She helped Jake with simple tasks, learning by watching and asking endless questions. Her language skills improved daily, and she could now hold basic conversations. Jake had also learned a lot about her. Her people, the Valari, were explorers and scientists. They traveled the stars studying other worlds and species. Lyra had been researching Earth from space when her ship malfunctioned. Some kind of energy surge had fried her systems, sending her crashing down. The Valari didn't contact primitive species, she explained. It was against their rules. Earth was being watched, studied, but from a distance. Humans weren't ready for contact yet, her people believed. Why not ready? Jake had asked. Lyra had looked uncomfortable. My people think humans too aggressive. Too much fighting. Too dangerous. Jake couldn't really argue with that assessment. Human history was written in blood. But he wanted her to see there was more to humanity than war and violence. Now with winter settling in, Jake had his chance. Come on, he said, pulling on his heavy coat. You need warm clothes. He found an old jacket that had belonged to his grandfather, along with gloves and a wool hat. Lyra looked ridiculous in the oversized clothes, but she smiled as Jake wrapped a scarf around her neck. Now you're ready for winter. Outside, Lyra took her first steps in snow. She bent down, scooping up a handful and watching it melt against her warmer skin. The patterns under her skin glowed brighter in the cold, and Jake realized it might be how her body regulated temperature. Beautiful, she said softly, looking around at the transformed forest. Jake taught her how to check the firewood supply, how to stack logs so they stayed dry, and how to keep the path to the shed clear. Lyra was a fast learner, her movements becoming more confident each day. She seemed to enjoy the physical work, something Jake suspected her people didn't do much of anymore. Your people don't do this? He asked one afternoon as they split wood together. No, we have machines. Technology does everything. She swung the axe, splitting a log cleanly. She was getting good at it. We forget how to do things ourselves. Is that a bad thing? Lyra paused, resting the axe. I think maybe yes. We are comfortable, but we forget how to be strong, how to survive without machines. She looked at Jake with respect. You know how to survive. How to live. My people would die here in 1 week. Jake felt a surge of pride at that, not because her people would fail, but because she recognized the value in what humans could do, the simple practical skills that kept someone alive. As winter deepened, their daily routine became familiar. Jake would wake first, get the fire going, and start breakfast. Lyra had finally figured out what she could eat from Earth, certain fruits, nuts, and surprisingly honey. Jake had a few jars from a local beekeeper, and Lyra loved it. After breakfast, they would work, checking traps, gathering firewood, maintaining the cabin. In the afternoons, they would sit by the fire, and Jake would teach Lyra more English. She taught him about the stars, pointing out constellations and telling him which ones had worlds with life. That one, she said one night, indicating a cluster of stars. My home very far, many light years. Do you miss it? Jake asked quietly. Lyra was silent for a long moment. Yes, I miss my family, my friends, my work. She looked at him. But here is not so bad. Here I learn new things. Here I have friend, Jake smiled. Yeah, you do. The evenings became Jake's favorite time. Lyra was endlessly curious about Earth culture, and Jake found himself explaining everything from music to sports to why humans kept pets. In turn, she told him about the galaxy, about species that lived underwater their whole lives, about worlds where the sky was purple and the plants walked. One night, as a blizzard howled outside, Lyra asked him a difficult question. Jake, why you help me? Why you not call your government? I am alien. I am danger to you. Jake considered his answer carefully. When I found you, I saw someone who was hurt and needed help. That's all that mattered. I was a medic in the military. I took an oath to help people, and I don't think that oath has an expiration date or a species limit, but you risk much. If your people find me, then we'll deal with it, Jake said firmly. But I'm not going to let them take you away and treat you like some kind of specimen to study. You're a person, Lyra. You deserve respect and freedom. Tears formed in her large eyes the first time he had seen her cry. Your people say humans are violent, dangerous, but you are kind. You are good. Humans are complicated, Jake said. We can be violent, yeah, but we can also be compassionate, brave, loyal. We take care of our own, and Lyra, you're one of our own now. She wiped her eyes and smiled. Thank you, Jake, for everything. As January turned to February, their bond deepened. Lyra started contributing more ideas, improving Jake's systems with her advanced knowledge. She helped him optimize his solar panels by adjusting their angle, increasing power by 30%. She showed him how to purify water more efficiently, using materials from her damaged ship. But she also learned from him Jake taught her to track animals in the snow, reading the story their prince told. He showed her which plants were useful and which were dangerous. He taught her to carve wood, and she created beautiful figures of creatures from her world. One morning they were walking through the forest when Lyra stopped suddenly. Her eyes were fixed on something in the distance. Jake followed her gaze and saw deer, 3 of them, grazing in a small clearing. "Beautiful," Lyra whispered. "So peaceful." They watched together in silence until the deer moved on. As they walked back to the cabin, Lyra spoke thoughtfully. "On my world, we watch nature through screens. We study it from far away. But being here in it is different, better. I understand things now I never understood before." "Like what?" "Like why Earth is special. Why humans are special. You live with your planet, not separate from it. You understand the value of simple things. A warm fire, a good meal, a friend to share the snow with." She looked at him. "My people have forgotten this. We have everything, but we have lost something important." Jake understood what she meant. In trying to protect Lyra, in teaching her to survive, he had rediscovered parts of himself he thought were lost. The isolation he had chosen after the military wasn't peace. It was hiding. But with Lyra here, he felt alive again. Connected. "Maybe," Jake said slowly. "We're helping each other." Lyra smiled. That beautiful smile that lit up her whole face. "Yes, I think we are." They returned to the cabin as afternoon faded to evening. Inside, the fire crackled warmly. Copper was asleep on his favorite rug. Everything smelled like pine and wood smoke. Lyra hung up her coat and stood in the center of the room looking around. "This feels like home," she said softly, and Jake realized it felt like home to him too, in a way it hadn't before. Not just a place to hide anymore, but a real home. Their home. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountains in white. And inside the small cabin, a human and an alien sat by the fire sharing stories and warmth, proving that friendship could cross any distance, even the stars. Spring arrived with problems. The snow melted, revealing the paths and trails that had been buried for months. The forest came alive with birds and animals, and people started venturing into the mountains again after the long winter. Jake saw the hikers from a distance, 2 young men with backpacks, walking near the ridge where Lyra's ship had crashed. He felt his stomach drop. They were too close. "Way too close, Lyra," he called quietly. "Inside. Now." She heard the urgency in his voice and disappeared into the cabin without question. Jake watched the hikers through his binoculars. They were examining something on the ground. Tracks probably. The winter had been long, and he and Lyra had made many trips through the forest. The hikers eventually moved on, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. Spring meant more people, more chances to be discovered. 2 days later, his old friend Katie from the ranger station drove up the mountain road to his cabin. Jake saw the truck coming and his heart raced. "Hide in the cellar," he told Lyra. "Don't make any sound, please." The cellar was cool and dark, accessed through a trap door in the kitchen floor. Lyra's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded and climbed down. Jake covered the door with a rug and tried to calm his breathing before Katie knocked. "Jake, you old hermit," Katie called out cheerfully. "Open up." He opened the door with what he hoped was a casual smile. Katie was in her ranger uniform, her red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had been checking on him since he moved to the cabin, making sure he hadn't gone completely wild. "Katie, good to see you. You too. Can I come in? I've got some questions." His mouth went dry, but he stepped aside. "Sure, coffee?" As he made coffee, Katie explained. Some hikers had reported strange lights in the mountains months ago. Then they found unusual tracks and what looked like disturbed ground near the ridge. The government had satellites that picked up weird energy readings around the same time. "I know it's probably nothing," Katie said, accepting the coffee mug, "but I have to check it out." "You see anything unusual last fall? Maybe in October?" Jake's mind raced. He needed to lie convincingly. "I saw some lights, yeah. Figured it was a meteor or something. Didn't check it out. Nothing else? No strange sounds or smells?" "Nope, just a quiet winter. You know me, Katie, I keep to myself." She studied him for a moment, and Jake wondered if she could see the lie in his eyes. But finally she nodded. "Okay, well, if you do see anything weird, call it in, all right? There's talk about sending a team up here to investigate." After she left, Jake stood at the window, watching her truck disappear down the mountain road. His hands were shaking. "She is gone?" Lyra's voice came from behind him. She had climbed out of the cellar. Yeah. But Lyra, we have a problem. They're looking for you. The government knows something happened here. Lyra's face showed her worry. What we do? That night they sat by the fire discussing their options. They could run, but where would they go? Lyra couldn't exactly blend in with humans. They could hide better, but eventually someone would find her, or Jake could turn her in, which he would never do. There might be another way, Lyra said slowly. I tell you before, my ship had emergency beacon. If I can fix it, I can call my people. But it's broken, right? Yes, parts destroyed in crash. But maybe... She looked at Jake with hope in her eyes. Maybe we build new one? Use Earth materials? Jake had seen her ship. The technology was centuries beyond anything humans had. Lyra, I'm just a guy with some basic electronics knowledge. I can fix a radio or rewire a solar panel, but building alien technology? You are more than that. You are clever, creative. Humans are good at making things work with very little. She grabbed his hand. And I know the designs. I know how Beacon works. Together, maybe we do it? It was a crazy idea. Impossible, really. But as Jake looked at her hopeful face, he couldn't say no. When would your people be close enough to pick up a signal? Lyra pulled out a small device she had salvaged from her ship. It still worked partially, showing star maps. She calculated quickly. 6 weeks. Maybe 7. A scout ship will pass near Earth. If we send signal, they will hear. 6 weeks to build something that shouldn't be possible. Jake ran his hand through his hair. This is insane. Yes, Lyra agreed. But maybe insane works? They started the next morning. Jake cleared out his workshop, a small shed behind the cabin where he kept tools and spare parts. Lyra drew detailed diagrams trying to explain concepts that Jake barely understood. Energy fields, quantum frequencies, subspace communications. But Jake focused on what he could understand: circuits, power sources, and signal transmission. He stripped parts from old radios, took apart his satellite phone, and even sacrificed his truck's alternator. Lyra guided him, showing him how to arrange components in ways that seemed wrong but somehow created the effects they needed. The work was exhausting. They spent 12, sometimes 14 hours a day in the workshop. Jake's hands were covered in cuts and burns. Lyra pushed herself to exhaustion, her glowing patterns dimming by evening. But slowly, impossibly, it started to work. They created a power core from modified car batteries and some crystalline structures Lyra had salvaged from her ship. Jake figured out how to amplify the signal using principles from radio transmission, adapted in ways no human engineer would have thought possible. Lyra showed him how certain materials, when arranged correctly, could bend energy in ways that seemed to break physics. Your people would say this is impossible, Lyra said one night. Looking at their creation, my people don't know what they're talking about half the time, Jake replied, wiping grease from his hands. 3 weeks into the project, Katie showed up again. This time she wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit was with her, introducing himself as Agent Hayes from some department Jake had never heard of. Mr. Morrison, Hayes said, his eyes scanning everything. We're conducting an investigation in this area. Mind if we look around? Jake's blood ran cold, but he kept his face neutral. What kind of investigation? Classified. But it involves potential foreign technology. Have you seen anyone unusual in the area? Any equipment that doesn't belong? Lyra was in the workshop. If they searched the property, they would find her. Find everything? No, Jake said firmly. Nobody comes up here but Katie sometimes. And I don't have any foreign technology, just my truck and some old radios. Hayes didn't look convinced, but he couldn't search without a warrant. We'll be in the area, Mr. Morrison. Keep your eyes open. After they left, Jake and Lyra knew they were running out of time. The government was getting closer. They had maybe 2 weeks before someone came back with legal authority to search the property. They worked around the clock. Jake barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. Lyra pushed through her exhaustion, her hands steady even when her whole body trembled with fatigue. The beacon began to take shape. It looked like something from a science fiction movie. A central core surrounded by rings of metal and crystal, with wires and circuits connecting everything in patterns that hurt Jake's brain to look at. Will it work? Jake asked on the final night as they made the last connections. I don't know, Lyra admitted. We use Earth materials, Earth power. It should not work. But you make impossible things happen, Jake. You make me believe it will work. They tested the power core. The beacon hummed to life, the crystals glowing with inner light. The rings began to spin slowly, building energy. Readings on their improvised monitors showed the signal building, reaching out into space. "It's working," Jake breathed. "Lyra, it's actually working." She laughed, tears streaming down her face. "We did it. We really did it." But as they celebrated, Jake felt a strange emptiness growing in his chest. The beacon worked, which meant Lyra could go home, which meant she would leave. He looked at her glowing face, her joyful smile, and tried to be happy for her. But all he could think was that he was about to lose the best friend he had ever had, the person who had made his lonely cabin feel like a home. The night before the signal was scheduled, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch in the darkness, copper at his feet, staring up at the stars. Somewhere up there, a Valari scout ship was approaching. Tomorrow night, they would activate the beacon. Lyra's people would hear her signal and come for her. She would go home, and he would be alone again. The cabin door opened quietly. Lyra came out, wrapped in one of his flannel jackets that was too big for her. She sat down beside him without saying anything for a long time. "You are sad," she finally said. It wasn't a question. Jake tried to smile. "I'm happy for you. You get to go home, see your family again. But I'm going to miss you." "A lot," he looked at her. "This has been the best winter of my life, Lyra. Having you here, working together, learning from each other. I forgot what it was like to not be alone." Lyra was quiet, her glowing patterns dim in the darkness. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "Jake, I need tell you something." "I am scared." "Of what?" "Your people will be happy to see you alive." "No, I am scared because I don't want to go." Jake's heart stopped. "What?" "I've been thinking many days now. About home. About here. About what I want." She turned to face him fully. "My home is comfortable, safe, easy, but it is empty. My people, they live in comfort, but they forget how to really live. They forget what it means to work hard, to create with your hands to survive." She gestured to the cabin, the forest, the stars above. "Here I learn to live, not just exist. You teach me to be strong, to solve problems, to find joy in simple things. You show me what it means to have real friend, real home. Lyra, on my world I was just one researcher among many, doing job, living comfortable but nothing special. Here I am alive. I am happy." Tears shone in her large eyes. "Here I have you, and I don't want to leave you." Jake felt his own eyes burning. "Are you saying you want to stay?" "On Earth?" "Yes, if you want me to stay." "If I not bother you too much," Jake laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. "Bother me?" "Lyra, you made this place a home, a real home. I haven't been this happy in years." He took her hands carefully. "But what about your family? Your people?" "I will miss them. But I can send message, tell them I'm alive and safe. Tell them I choose to stay. They will understand, maybe not at first, but they will." She squeezed his hands. "Jake, you saved my life. You give me new life. I want to stay and live it with you." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, making plans. Lyra would send her signal, but not as a call for rescue. Instead, she would transmit a message explaining her choice to remain on Earth as an observer and researcher. She would provide her findings about humanity, showing her people that humans were more than their violent history suggested. "What if they say no?" Jake asked. "What if they demand you come back?" "Then I still stay. They cannot force me, and maybe if I stay I become bridge between your world and mine. First step toward future friendship." The next evening they activated the beacon. The device hummed and glowed, sending its signal up through the atmosphere and out into the vastness of space. Lyra input her message carefully, her fingers moving over the interface she had built from Earth materials and her own knowledge. The transmission lasted only a few minutes. Then they powered down the beacon and waited. 3 days later, a response came. The beacon's receiver picked up a signal and Lyra translated the message with tears in her eyes. "They receive my message. They are surprised, confused, but they accept my choice. They classify Earth as protected world with friendly contact. They will not interfere, but they will watch. If humans one day reach out to stars, I will be here to help make first contact smooth." "And they're okay with you staying?" "My supervisor is angry, but yes. They cannot force me to return, and my research is valuable to them." She smiled through her tears. "They say I bring honor to my people by choosing courage over comfort." But their relief was short-lived. The next morning, 3 black vehicles drove up the mountain road. Agent Hayes had returned, this time with a full team and search warrants. Jake and Lyra stood together on the porch as the agents surrounded the property. Hayes approached with a serious expression. "Mr. Morrison, we have evidence of extraterrestrial technology on this property. We need you and your companion to come with us for questioning." Jake stepped forward. "She hasn't done anything wrong. She crashed here by accident. I've been protecting her." "That's harboring an unauthorized alien presence," Hayes said. "That's a serious offense." "Offense?" Lyra's voice was clear and strong. "I am not criminal. I am scientist. I am researcher. And I choose to stay on Earth." Hayes looked at her with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You don't have that authority to make that choice." "Actually," a new voice said, "she might." Everyone turned. Katie was walking up the path, but she wasn't alone. She was with several people in military uniforms and one older woman in a business suit. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Helen Price, director of a government program Jake had never heard of. "We've been monitoring the signals from this location. We've also received communication from the Volari ship in orbit. They've made it clear that Lyra is a voluntary ambassador and that any attempt to detain her would be considered an act of aggression." Hayes looked furious. "We can't just let an alien live freely among humans." "Actually, we can under very specific circumstances," Dr. Price said calmly. She looked at Jake and Lyra. "You two have created a unique situation. The Volari are willing to establish formal, if limited, contact with Earth because of Lyra's presence here. But there are conditions." Over the next several hours, negotiations took place in Jake's small cabin. It was surreal, watching government officials and military personnel crowded into his kitchen, discussing the future of human-alien relations over coffee. The agreement they reached was this: Lyra would remain with Jake under loose observation. She would share carefully selected information to help humanity's development, but nothing that would violate her people's protocols about technological contamination. In exchange, the government would protect her identity and allow her to live freely. Jake would be her official liaison and guardian. The cabin would be monitored remotely, but they would otherwise be left alone. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Price said as they finalized the details. "But then again, everything about this situation is unprecedented." As the officials finally left, promising to return with formal paperwork, Jake and Lyra stood together watching the vehicles disappear down the mountain road. "That was intense," Jake said. "Yes, but we stay together. That is what matters." Katie was the last to leave. She hugged Jake tightly. "You old fool. You've been hiding an alien all winter?" "I was protecting a friend," Jake said simply. Katie looked at Lyra, then back at Jake. "She's good for you. I haven't seen you this alive in years." She lowered her voice. "Take care of each other." "We will," Jake promised. As autumn arrived again, almost a full year after Lyra's crash, they settled into their new normal. The cabin had been modified slightly. They had built a small greenhouse where Lyra grew plants from seeds her ship had carried, plants from her world that could survive in Earth soil. Jake had expanded the workshop, and they spent hours there working on projects that blended human ingenuity with Volari knowledge. Lyra had learned to chop wood like an expert. She could track animals through the forest, start a fire with flint and steel, and cook a decent stew. She wore Jake's old flannel shirts and jeans, her silver skin and glowing patterns the only signs she wasn't human. Jake had learned about the stars, about the vast galaxy beyond Earth's sky. Lyra taught him her language, shared stories of her world, and helped him see humanity from an outside perspective, both the good and the bad. One evening, as the first snows of their second winter together began to fall, they sat by the fire. Copper was asleep on the rug. The cabin was warm and filled with the smell of pine and wood smoke. Lyra was working on a carving, her hands skilled now with the knife. "Jake," she said softly, "do you ever regret helping me that day?" He looked at her in surprise. "Never, not once. Why?" "Because your life is complicated now. Government watching, responsibilities, before you were free." Jake shook his head. "Before I was alone. I was hiding from the world. You didn't complicate my life, Lyra. You gave me a reason to live it again." She smiled, that beautiful smile that still made his heart warm. "You know what I write in my reports to my people?" "What?" "I tell them that humanity's greatest strength is not technology or weapons. It is heart. The ability to see someone in need and help them, even when it is dangerous. The ability to make home anywhere with anyone. The courage to choose kindness over fear. She looked around the cabin. I tell them about you, Jake. About human who found broken alien and made her family. And what do they say? They say maybe they were wrong about humans. Maybe your people are ready for stars after all. Just need a little more time. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountains in white. Inside the small cabin in the Colorado Rockies, a human and an alien sat by the fire, their friendship a bridge between two worlds. The cabin was no longer just Jake's. It was theirs. A home built on trust, friendship, and the simple truth that kindness could cross any distance, even the vast emptiness between the stars. And as Lyra returned to her carving and Jake stoked the fire, copper,